For today's video, myself and Jack are going to be going over all of the EX Pokemon, the trainer cards, and the most interesting other Pokemon in the Phantasmal Flames expansion. It's an over 100 card set that's going to be releasing on the 14th of November, and it does feature a Mega Charizard. So a little something here for both the players and the collectors. The first event this is going to be legal is going to be the Stuttgart Regional Championships, and we're also going to be discussing the cards released in the League Battle decks coming out featuring Mega Gengar and Mega Diancie, releasing on the 24th of October as well, because this really signifies the sort of change in the metagame. Some impactful cards coming out from these products, so we're talking about all of these in our discussion.
Kicking things off with the trainers then, we've got Jumbo Ice Cream, a brand new item card that says heal 80 damage from your active Pokemon that has 3 or more energy attached. Healing cards are often very hot or very cold in the Pokemon TCG, it's completely meta dependent, but we do think this one could be quite good in a number of archetypes, particularly the ones that are built around walling Pokemon like Kangaskhan and Crustle. Starting with Kangaskhan, we've already seen this is a really versatile attacker, but there's also been a build focused on how tanky this Pokemon is. And in those kinds of decks, Jumbo Ice Cream could be very, very strong. The most relevant of these is the Kangaskhan Fortress deck. This deck already plays Fighting Olay and intends to try and make your opponent take 8 prizes, giving up the first 2 prize cards with Fortress, and then making them get through 2 Mega Kangaskhan's. Now, like I say, this deck already plays Fighting Olay, which works pretty well because you're usually behind on prizes because you give up the first couple with Fortress's ability. But Fighting Olay only heals for 60 damage, whereas the Jumbo Ice Cream can heal for 80, and can heal if you're ahead on prizes as well, which is sometimes useful too. Even just the extra 20 healing from this card compared to Fighting Olay can really help. It can sometimes mean you don't always have to find that extra Acerolas Mischief, and you can then use other supporters, because sometimes this deck has to try and chain the Acerolas Mischief turn after turn, and because of that it can't always be as flexible as it wants to be with its supporters. But with Jumbo Ice Cream, you can sometimes have enough healing to mean that you can get away with a turn without using Acerola's Mischief, and therefore can use one of these other powerful supporters like Boss. Similarly, this could be really powerful in Crustle. Obviously, this has a lot less HP than Kangaskhan, but that actually means you're healing a large percentage of your overall health with Jumbo Ice Cream, which is nice. There's been Crustle lists that have played Pokevital A as their A-Spec, so it means that if you're playing that kind of build, you get your A-Spec back that could potentially be used as a secret box or something instead, which is just really important for getting into the game as the Crustle deck. Though I do think this is slightly worse in Crustle than it is in Kangaskhan, because a lot of the time Crustle has to be playing to stay in the game a lot more than the Kangaskhan decks. The Kangaskhan decks very much function on their own once they've got those 2 Kangaskhan's set up, whereas a lot of the time Crustle has to keep finding little pieces of its toolkit to stay in the game, because plenty of different decks will have some sort of unorthodox answers that try and get through Crustle. Even so though, we can see Jumbo Ice Cream in either of these decks, and potentially other tanking decks going forward, so definitely going to be a card with some potential here.
Next up, we have the Heat Burner item card. Now, you must discard 1 basic fire energy from your hand in order to play this, but when you do, you can choose a tool, special energy card, or stadium card your opponent has in play and discard it. The flexibility really is the key selling point here. So the discussion isn't like, is the card good? It's more about, can we weave this into certain archetypes? And actually, there's quite a few decks using basic fire energy in their lists right now. Obviously, Charizard X ones come to mind. Ceruledge decks might actually look to have this. They can't really fit many stadium cards themselves. So having a card like this that can fit that same one spot, but then have the extra utility of getting rid of either tools, whether they're hit point buff, like we've seen recently with like Bravery Charms, for example. Maybe you're just disrupting a air balloon. Maybe you're just giving yourself an extra 20 damage, speeding up your Abyssal Flames by drawing into this item card. This definitely surpasses any single include stadium that you could have for the Ceruledge deck. Same thing really for Golden Go. It's great to have some stadium bumps to get around jamming towers so your air balloons are active, but at the same time, sometimes you could be hitting, again, hit point buffing cards or other disruptive tools. You can also get rid of special energy cards as well. We know that Neo Up Energy is prevalent right now, Mist Energy is prevalent right now, even things like Luminous Energy, lots of different special energy cards that you can hit, and especially when you're a one-hit KO, also being able to take out an energy on the bench sometimes can leave your opponent with nothing. Think about like Dragapult archetypes, for example. If you're taking out the active whilst also discarding a Luminous on their bench Dragapult, they're not going to be coming back at you with anything nearly as relevant. And because Golden Go not only has like that 1 copy of Fire in the deck, but something that you can superior back throughout the game, means the Heat Burner might be live for more turns than you would expect. Also, Dragadusk. You know, we know that Dragadusk plays oftentimes like 3 to 4 Night Stretcher. It's not crazy to think that you could play a Heat Burner in the deck that then becomes a sort of catch-all. Now you can discard Mist Energies that little bit more comfortably, which I think is really important for Drago Dusk, especially if there's going to be Psyduck plus Mist Energy text going around. Again, getting rid of key Stadium cards is pretty nice as well. So I think just the versatility of this card and the fact that there are so many different archetypes that we have in the game right now that can easily weave in the Fire Energy, I definitely think this is going to be a high-tier card. I'm thinking like around the 4-star, because I think it's going to only really see play as like a 1-count in decks, but it is so versatile and is going to be this really great catch-all item card in the game.
Next up, we have Wonder Patch. This is an item card that says attach a basic Psychic Energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Psychic Pokemon. Now, if you've been playing the Pokemon trading card game for any amount of time, you'll probably recognize this card in a different format, whether it's Dark Patch, whether it's Aqua Patch, whether it's Metal Saucer. We've had plenty of this card, and now we've got Wonder Patch for Psychic types. It's a really interesting time to have a card like this come into format because we obviously have Gardevoir, which already does basically everything this card could ever want to do on a Stage 2. Now, admittedly, it does have some downsides. You need to get a Stage 2 into play, deals an extra bit of damage to your Pokemon, but we've seen just how powerful Gardevoir is. So it feels like a really strange time to introduce this card in the format, and therefore one that you may not think is actually going to be particularly powerful, because Gardevoir already does this, but better. But we have started to see from some early Japanese lists that this could be a new way of playing Terra Box. There's a brand new Mega Diancie in this set that acts as a Psychic benched Pokemon that isn't weak to Dark, which is really important. We'll talk about the Diancie later. But it does seem like this could be a brand new engine for Terra Box. Instead of using Teal Mask and Grass Energy, you have Wonder Patch and Diancie, and you're able to energy switch those energy off instead. Now obviously you do lose that little bit of draw that Teal Mask gives you, but Diancie serves as a decent attacker as well, so definitely could be a new way of playing Terra Box. There's already been a couple of decent results for this style of build of Terra Box, and we do think this is going to be where the card sees the most play. But it is also worth noting that some of the more fun archetypes like Alakazam and Slowking also get a benefit from this card. There's actually been a huge amount of Alakazam so far in the City Leagues. I don't think that necessarily means anything. It's obviously already seeing a bit of play online, but it's very, very low tier and has a lot of issues against a lot of the top tier decks. But it's been proven that it can beat some of the aggressive decks because it's just a very, very powerful one-prize deck, and if your opponent isn't playing any kind of hand disruption, it can definitely like churn through 2-prize Pokemon quite easily. So buffs to things like that and Slowking are never going to be frowned upon, and I can definitely see this card making a wave in those decks as well.
The first tool card we have to discuss is the Punk Helmet. If the Dark Pokemon this tool is attached to is in the active position and damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, put 4 counters on the attacking Pokemon. Now, we have a huge host of really relevant Dark types in the game right now, and a few of them actually really do appreciate these counters being flung onto the opponent's active. Think about Armani's Grimmsnarl that falls just short of knocking out basic EX Pokemon. Possibly the Punk Helmet could help out here. Same thing for the N Zoroark EX, sort of known for its lower damage output, has often even used Binding Mochi in the deck alongside a mini poison package with Janine and Petrarunt. Now you can use the Punk Helmet. Suddenly if they hit into the Zoroark, then you're in range with your Reshiram, although if your Zoroark's getting damaged, then you are also able to deal with them via the powerful Rage. And even the Mega Absol, a basic that's popped up recently, and although you already have Monkey Dory that can help manipulate your way towards terminal period attacks, possibly the Punk Helmet could be another way to make that happen, or again, push your Claw of Darkness closer to KOs as well, again with the help of Monkey Dory. So I think it's not a great tool card. I think most of these archetypes probably won't look to have this, but simply because there are so many great Dark options in the game right now, and even more that we're going to discuss from Phantasmal Flames, I think I'm going to give it a 2-star just for experimentation, because there are just so many Dark decks that I think are relevant, although right now I think it's not necessarily the best choice.
On to Sacred Charm then, a Pokemon tool card that says the Pokemon this card is attached to takes 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon that have any abilities. Now, we already have plenty of ways of either buffing a HP or reducing the damage taken from our Pokemon on tools already in the format, and not many of them are seeing play outside of specific use cases for certain ones. Things like Bravery Charm for basics and Defiance Vest for stage 1s. These do see play here and there, but ultimately it's only in specific situations where they're necessary. And because of that, a card like Sacred Charm I don't think is going to be particularly good. Ultimately, your opponent has control of whether they actually have to hit into this Sacred Charm. Obviously, they can just use a Tool Scrapper or anything like that to negate the effects of it. And on top of that, we have a number of one-hit KO decks in the format as well that are just not going to be bothered by this Sacred Charm whatsoever. That, along with the fact that people are already thinking about things like Cornerstone in decks, so they have an out to being able to get through with no abilities, means that sometimes this card will basically do nothing whatsoever. Now, obviously, a card like this could easily make it into one of these random control decks going forward, and we can never really account for that. It's just going to be completely meta-dependent, so it's a tool for one of these control decks, and other than that, it's not going to see much competitive play overall.
Our first supporter card is a really intriguing one. Grimsley's move states, look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose a dark Pokemon you find there and put it onto your bench. Shuffle the other cards face down and put them on the bottom of your deck. You can't play this card on your first turn. So this is a great option to cheat Pokemon into play faster than you otherwise would. Now, of course, you can't do this on the first turn of the game, but it probably requires a bit of setup anyway, because you're only looking at the top 7 cards of your deck, so there's no guarantee that there's going to be a Pokemon there unless you try and set it up with some synergy cards. I think the main one is the Academy at Night Stadium card, where we can search for a Pokemon or naturally draw into a Pokemon, then we stash it on top of our deck with this Academy at Night, and then suddenly you can Grimsley into the card and guarantee what is probably going to be a Stage 2 Pokemon. I think a lot of the time you have to weigh up the balance between just playing an evolution line and accepting that like Rare Candy is relevant in the deck or TM Evolution is relevant in the deck, versus then going for this gimmick where you're giving up your draw supporter potentially to instead have this option that then gets a Pokemon into play. So it really has to only be these Stage 2 Pokemon that I think are worth building around. The first one that comes to mind is Charizard EX, which is really weird actually, because Charizard, one of the main selling points is Infernal Rain is an amazing coming into play ability, and you lose that if you use the Grimsley's move, so you have to self-power up the Charizard. That said though, it's still a powerful attacking Pokemon that gets really good in the late game, so if you can cheat this into your deck, it still could be pretty relevant, provided of course you have Fire Energy in your deck. But I think the main one I'm looking at is actually the new Mega Gengar EX, thanks to its Shadow Hiding ability. When your Dark Pokemon are knocked out by damage from an attack, your opponent's Pokemon EX, they take 1 fewer prize. And I think that's a great Pokemon that just sort of sits in play for whatever Dark deck you're building. And I actually think Zoroark might be the best archetype that can use this. It means that you might have the license to use a Grimsley's move just randomly during the game, and then you can have decent odds of hitting either Gengar or Zoroark. But also, we know that Zoroark has used Secret Box in the past, and Grimsley's move has really good synergy here with that Secret Box. If you turn one Arven for Box and don't use the box, or even use it for a partial option for like an item card for like a Poffin, for example, and you hold Grimsley plus Academy for the next turn, that can put you in really good stead for getting that Gengar. So you have the fallback of drawing your Zoroark and just getting those into play, but you can also set up your deck with the Stadium card to get this one Gengar into play and completely forego having any Haunter or Ghastly in there and just sacrifice one use of supporter throughout the game to get this into play, and suddenly your Zoroark become really annoying one prize Pokemon for the most part. You know, if your opponent can manipulate this by taking knockouts without damage or not using their EXs. So it's not flawless, but it's a really good ability that you can cheese into play, and it's quite space efficient. Now, could Zoroark still play like a regular engine and have Candy Gengar? Yes, possibly. But the Grimsley does seem like quite appealing in that regard. Also, of course, Mega Absol's popped up as of late. And again, I think there's enough draw potential in that deck with the Kangaskhan, and you already have Trolley anyway, so you can get the Ghastly basically for free early on and go for the Candy into Absol. And I think that's probably better than going for Grimsley in this case. So I think the Absol deck won't look to have this, but I do think the Zoroark one is the most appealing one, mostly because it's just like a really thin package. You could play one Grimsley, one Gengar in an otherwise like pretty normal Zoroark deck, and of course have like 1 or 2 Academy at Night. And Academy at Night is just good at INO proofing anyway, and like protecting against Mega Absol now, which is becoming more relevant because of Claw of Darkness being disruptive. So I think there are some good reasons to like the Grimsley's move, at least in the Zoroark deck. That's where I'm most intrigued, and I think me and Jack are going to put some time into this as an archetype. It hasn't been doing well in the City League so far, so I'm still really just banking my bets here on the 3-star that we can make the Zoroark build work.
Next up is Dawn, a truly fantastic supporter card. It says search your deck for a basic Pokemon, a Stage 1 Evolution Pokemon, and a Stage 2 Evolution Pokemon, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Now, Dawn comes out at a really interesting time. We already have some fantastic Pokemon search in the form of supporter cards right now. We have Brock and we have Hilda, which are both seeing a huge amount of play in some of the most successful archetypes like Dragapult. But we also have great ball search cards right now, some really good stadiums for searching out Pokemon, so there's just lots of Pokemon search already. However, I still think there's going to be a lot of space for Dawn in the meta, particularly in the Stage 2 archetypes. I think a lot of the time, some certain decks are still going to use Hilda and Brock to be able to search for specific combo pieces. Dragapult really comes to mind that I think they're still going to prefer things like Hilda and Brock. But I think this is a very, very powerful card in Charizard, which looks to be a very strong deck going into the next format with a couple of key upgrades it gets from this set. But also, this is just the perfect supporter for any of these sort of mid-tier Stage 2 Pokemon. Typically the one prize archetypes, things like Round or Feraligatr, anything like that. None of these archetypes are great right now, but this is the perfect supporter for those, and I feel like we're getting a critical mass of all of these very, very strong ball search cards and Pokemon search cards, and they're really, really leaning into how powerful they can make these supporters and these Stage 2 Pokemon. I think it's just a matter of time before we have a single prize archetype that can use Dawn fully and really, really test things like the Dragapults, the Gardevoir, some of these powerful EX Pokemon. I think we're not far away from being able to have that kind of archetype in the format. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Dawn is going to break the back of the format with things like Round or Alakazam, any of these crazy Stage 2s, but I just think we're slowly getting to the point where they keep pushing the boundaries of how powerful they can make these Stage 2s, and it's cards like Dawn that are going to help us get there. That being said, though, in mainstay archetypes, I still think this is fantastic in Charizard. It helps you find all manner of different Pokemon on the specific turns you need them, your different activators for Charizard, your Pidgeot line, your Dusknoir line. And more importantly, it does it without having to discard any cards or anything like that, so you end up not having to rely on things like Ultra Ball anywhere near as much. Whilst I don't think this is going to be a 4-of supporter in any of these archetypes, I think there's definitely a lot of argument for it in Charizard and Dragapult, and because of that, because of how powerful both these archetypes are, and the fact that Charizard, like I say, gets a lot of buffs from this set, I really think this warrants a very high star rating. It's going to be a very, very flexible card over the next couple of years. We've seen how much they have tried to push the boundaries of these supporter cards searching out Pokemon, and I think we really are benefiting from it now.
We also have the Firebreather supporter cards, allowing you to search your deck for up to 7 basic fire energy and put them into your hand directly. Now, as we know, there are a couple archetypes that want to have a huge surplus of fire energy. The Ceruledge EX is the first one that comes to mind. You can pull out a bunch of fire energy, then use like Squawkabilly EX if it's turn 1 going second, or simply by having like Ultra Balls, Secret Box, Vessels, that sort of thing. You can start pitching them knowing that you can also like look to research or Carmine on the following turn as well. Similar to how we've seen Brilliant Blender be an A-spec choice in Ceruledge, this is a great way to just like naturally thin the deck straight away, and then for the remainder of the game you're probably going to be far less clunky. Now I do think Ceruledge is probably still best with the Lunatone Solrock package, so I don't necessarily think that's going to be the best option possible for Golden Go to have this approach, where we have seen ESP coming out of the deck as of late. You could go down a direction of having just a handful of Metal Energy and then a huge chunk of basic fire. Now the Firebreather is instantly getting you 350 damage, which again sounds really, really devastating. You possibly then even change from a huge chunk of superiors to just a couple of them, and instead you look towards having like Energy Recycler and Firebreather in your deck instead. Now that does commit your supporter card, which is a little bit worrying, but I think that could be an option. Again, I think there's probably superior ways to play Golden Go, so again, I think this falls a little bit shy. Also, the Mega Charizard X EX might be intrigued by this, because Inferno X is really good at taking a knockout for just like 4 or so energy, and you can rain them all into play in one go with Oricorio EX anyway. So there can be situations where you use a Fire Breather, put all 7 into play, remove 4 of them, and then even after hand disruption, you probably have enough energy floating around the board that you can still reach a KO on the following turn. So you almost like proof yourself from Iono by preemptively putting a bunch of energy into play. Now, all of the issues with this is that Fire Breather has to be timed correctly. You still need to have your regular consistency supporter cards. You can't really commit to having many of them, so you probably only play like 1 or 2 in the deck. You then also have to factor in, like, will there even be that many energy in the deck during that point in the game regardless? And, like, do you play Pokegear or whatnot? It feels like it's such a difficult card to time correctly, and you have to build your deck in a slightly strange way to make it come together. I think the archetypes that might consider it probably already have better builds out there, so just going to give it a 2 for experimentation.
Onto the stadiums then, and we've got the Battle Colosseum. This stadium says prevent all damage counters from being placed on benched Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, by the effects of attacks or abilities used by the opponent's Pokemon. So what this means is no Dragapult damage placement, no Munkidori damage placement, no Dusknoir or Dusclops damage placement on any of your benched Pokemon while the stadium is in play. Now those cards right there are some of the most important, most prolific cards in the format right now. This stadium targets all of the top tier archetypes. And because of that, this just will be powerful. It's going to see play in a lot of different archetypes. Obviously, decks can still put damage counters on your active Pokemon, but that's a lot less flexible, especially with the likes of things like Munkidori and Dusknoir, and it straight up invalidates half of Dragapult's attack, and honestly, it's the good half of Dragapult's attack, being able to set up multiple KOs in certain situations. That's exactly what Dragapult is about, and when this stadium is in play, all it's doing is just 200 damage to the active spot. I mentioned earlier on that Charizard was going to be getting some buffs from this set, and I think this is one of the other big buffs that the deck gets. Dragapult has always been a huge thorn in the side for Charizard, and in some early Japanese lists, we've seen up to even 3 of this stadium in the deck, just to really counter that Dragapult matchup. But also, like I say, you're hitting a lot of other different decks in the format right now that play all of these very, very powerful cards. I think this is also fantastic for a lot of one-prize decks that typically would be bullied by the likes of multiple Munkidoris, or Dragapult, or Dusknoir, all of these decks that may be pushed out of the meta because of the existence of all of this damage manipulation we have in the format right now. They could easily play a lot of Battle Colosseum to try and help out in those matchups. Now, ultimately, your opponent could just bounce this on the turn that they're going to be using all of their powerful attacks and abilities, so it's not a surefire answer. But these decks often don't play a huge amount of stadiums, so having this in a high count, plus also combining this with something like an Iono in the same way that Watchtower is sometimes seen as a tech for the Noctowl decks, that's where Battle Colosseum is going to be very, very powerful. And I think because it's a mainstay in Charizard, but just hits so many important, relevant, very powerful cards in the format right now, it has to be a very, very high star rating. It may only ever be a tech option, but a card like this will definitely see play, especially in the ebbs and flows of the meta. As people start playing this, maybe they'll switch off of playing things like the Dusknoir builds and go back to like a straight Dragapult build with a heavy stadium account, all of that kind of stuff. This is for sure going to be a card that somewhat manipulates the meta and manipulates the cards that people decide to play. So very, very powerful stadium. Really cool to see a stadium actually hitting some of the key cards in format that have been a problem for a while now. And whilst I don't think it's going to stop people playing things like Munkidori, Dusknoir, Dragapult, it's definitely just another thorn in their side to try and bring them back down onto a power level where other decks can compete with them.
Unfortunately, the other stadium we gain in the set is far less appealing. The Vertigo Valley says that confused Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, don't recover from confusion when they evolve or devolve. We have seen stadiums like this in the past. The Sea of Nothingness basically saw no play, and that was all status conditions, not just confusion. And unfortunately, confusion's like one of the weaker status conditions you can inflict because your opponent can already just retreat out of it with no problems or switch out or whatever. So yeah, I think this is a really low impact stadium card. There are going to be some Pokemon that can inflict confusion coming out in this expansion, but unfortunately I don't think either of them are all that good, so going to be just the 1-star for the Vertigo Valley.
Moving into the Megas and EX Pokemon then, the first is going to be Mega Heracross EX. It's a 280 HP Grass-type basic Pokemon, 2 attacks, it's got the Panzerhorn attack for 2 Grass Energy, and then Mountain Thrust for 3. It's also worth noting that this is weak to Fire, which is relevant given how popular Goldengo is right now. Kind of gets caught in the crossfire of Goldengo being targeted, but also is at risk from all of the Ceruledge being played right now. That first attack then, Panzerhorn for 2 Grass Energy, deals 100 damage, and if this Pokemon was damaged by an attack during your opponent's last turn, this attack does that much more damage. That means, for example, if a Dragapult hits your Mega Heracross EX on the previous turn, Panzerhorn will do 300 instead of just that 100. However, already you're then seeing the issue. Because your damage is inherently controlled by the amount of damage your opponent does to you, they actually end up dictating how much Panzerhorn is going to be doing, meaning that they can make sure they're out of range of a KO with whatever attack they use. So something like a Dragapult can freely hit into a Mega Heracross, knowing that it's not going to get one shot back without some kind of damage mod, which ultimately you might play, but realistically you don't want your opponent to be able to manipulate how much damage you're doing. Similarly, Mountain Thrust for 3 energy deals 170 damage, you discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. It's another attack that ultimately isn't worth investing in a 3-pies basic Pokemon, especially one that's weak to Fire right now. It's not a great time to be a Grass-type Pokemon, and there's also a lot of stiff competition for Mega Heracross. We've already got Teal Mask, we've already got Mega Venusaur and Meganium, all of these things that are just better Grass-type tools in your toolkit compared to Mega Heracross. And because of that, I don't think this card is going to see any play at all. It's just too weak, it's not powerful enough, and it's not really going to be able to make an impact, unfortunately.
Moving on to the big bad Mega Charizard X EX. It's a 360 hit point fire type stage 2 Pokemon that just has the 1 attack here, Inferno X. For 2 fire energy, you do 90 times the amount of fire energy you discard among your Pokemon. This is a really powerful damage modifier, knowing that you can deal 360 damage just for 4 energy discarded, knowing that a regular Charizard EX's Infernal Rain can already accelerate 3 immediately, meaning that a hand attachment gets you straight into a massive KO. And also there's the synergy of the new Oricorio EX's Excited Turbo that also allows us to rain basic fire energy into play, provided the Mega Charizard is already online. So straight away, there's a couple of directions that we have to discuss here. Firstly, within just sort of regular Terra Charizard EX decks, there's a lot of appeal here, simply because it gives Charizard a Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon wall breaking option. That's definitely going to be an appealing card to have in the deck. Also, it can help cover your grass type weakness. Suddenly now you can bounce back with a really powerful fire type that also has that huge 360 hit points to fall back behind. What I think is really intriguing about this Mega Charizard X EX is that it can come in really early on with really high damage outputs when Burning Darkness isn't all that impressive, and then as your opponent deals with the Mega, suddenly your Burning Darkness is in like great range to then follow up for the remainder of the game. So it's no doubt going to be a card that forces like even better setup. You need to have hit your Poffins, you need to have hit your Candies to be able to get it attacking, but if you can do it early enough, it could be this big presence within a Charizard deck, and at the very least it might earn its spot simply as a cornerstone answer. Now pivoting towards the sort of Oricorio build, and I'm a bit more skeptical about this approach where we go all in on the big 3-prize Mega. Of course, we still have to caveat that the format still has a huge number of one-hit KO decks in the format, with Golden Go and Raging Bolt still roaming about. Also, the option for Terminal Period with Absol can deal with this really chunky Pokemon with great ease, and we're a deck that needs to play all basic energy really to make the most out of the Inferno X attacks, so you can't easily play Mist Energy or anything like that. We're also going to be in this awkward position where we have to have vulnerable EX Pokemon in play because Oricorio is going to be your key accelerator. So you're going to have 3 prizes in play, single prize evolving Pokemon in play, and easy 2 prizes that your opponent can pick off, meaning that they're normally going to find an easy prize map of just 3 attacks throughout the game if they just have one option within their deck that can take a big KO. Equally, none of these cards are like draw engine Pokemon, so you're going to have to try and manufacture that within your deck as well, as playing that huge count of energy cards, having superiors in there as well, the rare candies. It's just going to be a bit of a clunky engine to get going compared to our other O-Hit KO decks in the format, and yes, this one still gives up 3 prizes. And just for a quick note on the evolving Pokemon, the Charmander now has an 80 hit point option that also has the Nimble ability. If this Pokemon has no energy attached, its retreat cost is 0. That's actually a really nice option. It works well with the Excited Turbo Oricorio because you need to be attaching to your benched Pokemon. It also could allow you to have Budew in the deck pretty easily because you have natural pivots within your list. And actually, Charmander also has the 1 energy attachment live Coal attack that just has 20, and that can actually deal with Budews as well thanks to weakness. So all round, this is a really great Charmander and gains that extra 10 hit points, but sometimes 10 hit points is a downside, and actually I think this card won't make it into the Charizard Pidgeot builds because they still want to go very heavy on Poffin. They often don't have the space or want to commit to Artisan within the deck or even that many Nest Balls. So I think this isn't really going to show up much in a Pidgeot build, possibly a one-of if you're playing 3 or 4 copies of Charmander, but most likely not going to be in that list, although I do think it's going to be the core option, the core choice within an Oricorio build, because that approach will have to play probably a high count of Nest Ball anyway, just to get your Oricorio online in a timely fashion. So the Charmander is an interesting one. It might show up in regular Zard, but most likely going to be good in the Mega Charizard build. Unfortunately, we don't think that one's anywhere near as exciting. And then there's also a Charmeleon. It has 110 hit points, which again can keep you out of range out of more things. I think as we see more Solrock Lunatone and possibly throwing in like the premium power pros and whatnot, the extra 10 hit points might push it over the edge for the other current 100 hit point option we have in the game. Overall, we're rating Mega Charizard X EX pretty highly just because it's showing up in a lot of the Charizard Pidgeot builds out in Japan right now. Not so much a high rating because we're expecting the Oricorio build to succeed. This is all about weaving in the one-of within regular Charizard builds right now.
Onto Oricorio EX, we've just talked about Mega Charizard, and Oricorio is a great partner for Mega Charizard if you're building around just the Mega Charizard rather than putting it into like the regular Charizard EX decks. The ability Excited Turbo says, as often as you like during your turn, if you have any Fire Mega Evolution Pokemon EX in play, you may use the ability. You can attach a basic Fire energy from your hand to one of your benched Fire Pokemon. Now obviously this synergizes really well with the Mega Charizard EX, letting you accelerate a load of energy onto your bench to then use Inferno X to discard all those energy and do a huge amount of damage. And that's basically where we've been seeing this card in Japan so far. The partnership here is pretty clear, and when you've got things like Firebreather as well to search out all of these energy, you can really see how this archetype can work all together. However, the interesting thing about Mega Charizard EX is because it seems like it might be better as a one-of in regular Charizard decks, that actually really severely hurts how powerful Oricorio is going to be, because it doesn't look like Oricorio is going to be the best partner for the Mega. There have been a few lists in Japan that played one of the Oricorio as well anyway, just to be able to accelerate some energy quite quickly, so you don't have to worry about getting multiple stage 2s out to be able to use Inferno X for a lot of damage. But ultimately, because Charizard EX decks really benefit from not having to play a huge amount of energy cards because Inferno Rain searches them all out, it means that there's this weird anti-synergy between the regular Charizard and Oricorio, and sometimes these two don't really work very well together in a partnership. That's why it's by no means staple in the Charizard decks, and I think this really shines only if you're building around the Mega Charizard itself on its own. You definitely could play one in Charizard, but I think it's just a separate archetype overall. And I do think that archetype is weaker than just putting Mega Charizard into the regular Charizard decks anyway. That being said though, like I say, some people are playing this as a one-of in the deck, and so because of that, Oricorio still sits in that mid-tier for us. It's not going to be the new way to play Charizard in our opinion, but as it's a card that can feature in the deck and also kind of makes another archetype potentially viable, it definitely sits around that 3-star for us.
Another interesting basic EX is Rotom here, a 190 hit point lightning type that has the multi-adapter ability. Your Pokemon with Rotom in their name may have up to 2 tools attached to them, and if this Pokemon loses this ability, you discard the tools from the Pokemon until it has just 1 remaining. It does also have the Thunderbolt attack for 1 lightning, 1 colorless, dealing 130 and discarding all energy from this Pokemon. A really terrible attack, so it's actually all about the ability here. And we actually do have a chunk of different Rotoms. Unfortunately, they all have different names as well, so you can fill your deck with a number of these Wash, Heat, Mow Rotom with ease, knowing that you can give yourself some nice type coverage within your little archetype that you have going here. Of course, you're going to have to commit a lot of spaces to tool cards. Now, there are some handy tools. Brave Bangle could push your damage output, Bravery Charm could push your hit points, and things like Counter Gain and EXP Share could keep you upkept on attachments, because all of the Gadget Show Rotoms here have a 2 colorless in their attack cost. I think by far the most interesting type coverage option is going to be Mow Rotom, so you probably want to play a couple copies of this one and just have some one-offs for type coverage for other situations. Definitely sounds a little bit clunky, sounds a little bit slow. There's a lot of vulnerable lower hit point Pokemon that have to be scattered onto your bench, which also then means that you don't have much space for engine Pokemon, because that's also limiting your Gadget Show damage output. So I think this one's definitely going to be a gimmicky rogue archetype based around these tools. Nothing more than that though, bit of a gimmicky archetype to try out.
Next up, we have Mega Diancie EX, a 270 HP Psychic basic Pokemon with a Diamond Coat ability and the Garland Ray attack. It's also important to note that this card is weak to Metal type rather than Dark type that a lot of Psychic types are weak to. That's very relevant for why this card looks like it could be a powerful inclusion into Gardevoir. The ability Diamond Coat says this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. It's a pretty simple ability, but it basically means that Mega Diancie has 300 HP, the same as things like Mega Kangaskhan and such. We've already seen there's been a bit of a change and a shift in the tide of these one-hit KO decks, as there's considerably less Raging Bolts around. The Goldengos have moved towards Lunarok, so they're a little bit slower, and Ceruledge, another one-hit KO deck, is a little bit slower than some of these other one-hit KO decks we've had in the past. And because of that, some of these basic Megas, Diancie included, are a little bit more survivable in the early turns than maybe they would have been when Raging Bolt was such a popular archetype. And because this is damage reduction, if ever your opponent doesn't take a KO on your Mega Diancie and just deals a bit of damage, they'll then have to go through Diamond Coat again, so it's kind of like doubling up. It's essentially a Bravery Charm if they have to hit through it twice. More importantly, the Garland Ray attack for 2 Psychic Energy deals 120 damage times the number of energy you discard from Diancie. Now, you can only discard up to 2 for this attack, but that does mean you can do 240 damage for 2 energy, which is really good at KOing basically any EX Pokemon that isn't an Evolving EX or isn't a Mega EX. All of these basic EXs, you're able to knock out in one shot with Mega Diancie EX. And it's all of these little things that don't seem particularly impressive on their own that actually push Diancie to end up seeing a lot of play pretty much in every Gardevoir list post its release over in Japan as a one-of attacker. The fact you're not weak to Dark, the fact you're able to take an easy 2-prize KO where Gardevoir can sometimes struggle with that or needs to find multiple cards to be able to do that, or multiple Monkey Dories or anything like that. The fact that all of these little things that don't seem massively relevant individually are all packed into this one card is actually what makes it a very, very powerful one-of in Gardevoir. Before, you'd have to use something like Mew to copy an attack, or hope that your opponent had overbenched and then be able to use Lily, or potentially have to attack with your Gardevoir EX and put it in the firing line just to try and take a 2-prize KO, particularly if your opponent was maybe up to a slow start where you haven't been able to get a lot of Monkey Dories into play and things like that. Now with Mega Diancie, you can do that quite easily. You've got a very, very clean 240 damage. And more importantly, you're doing it with a non-Dark Weak Pokemon. So all of these Pokemon that people are playing right now to try and capitalize on the amount of Dark Weakness that Gardevoir brings into the format, things like the Grimmsnarls and the Mega Absols, all of that kind of stuff, none of that is really bothering Mega Diancie. Ultimately, it just brushes off those hits and is able to deal a pretty big hit in return. And then again, once you've got your Monkey Dories on board and stuff like that, Garland very quickly gets to the point where it can even be dealing with Megas in one shot because of Monkey Dory sort of pushing your damage over the line from 240 to potentially 300, even 330 if you've got 3 Monkey Dory down. I mentioned earlier on that Mega Diancie has also seen a bit of a starring role in a new way of playing Terror Box as well, alongside Wonder Patch, instead of using the Teal Mask Ogerpon EX as the energy acceleration. There's still a bit of a split in the Japanese results so far as to the different types of Terror Boxes, and even in a regular Terror Box build with something like a Teal Mask, you could easily play Mega Diancie as a Psychic type basic attacker that can potentially hit for Psychic weakness if ever it becomes relevant that there's a lot of Psychic weak Pokemon in the format. Ultimately, the card is relatively weak. It's not like super flashy, but it just ticks a lot of boxes for what is one of the best decks, if not the best deck in format right now, as well as introducing a potential new way of playing another deck in the format. And that's why it reaches that 5-star for us. If it was impactful in any other deck that wasn't Gardevoir, it would probably sit at around the 4. But just the fact that every single Gardevoir is playing this right now means that this is a 5-star card in our eyes.
Sticking with the Psychic types, we have the Stage 1 Mismagius EX, a 260 hit point Psychic type Pokemon that has the Swirling Spell ability. If this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, when your opponent switches in a new active, it is now confused. Of course, you can use Boss's Orders or Iron Bundle or something along those lines to force a Pokemon into the active to instantly confuse it, but the annoyance here is that it kind of has to stay active if you want to react to your opponent switching back into a main attacker to actually make it work. And the 6 magic attack for 2 psychic just deals 150, and you can draw until you have 6 in hand, but that damage output really is lacking, and it feels like to make the most out of this swirling spell, you probably need to stay in the active position for the most part. I did think hard whether or not any control deck could take advantage of this, similar to the Fluffy Pillow Mareep from way back when, but when it's a multi-prize Stage 1 that also has to be in the active position, and it triggers from like a gusting effect, so the thing that's already attacking you won't be affected by the confusion straight away. It feels like it's all too much work, too many spaces in the deck as well, so I don't even think Control can look towards this card for any sort of slowdown opportunities either.
Next up, we have Mega Gengar then, and to be honest, this is probably my favourite card in the set. Mega Gengar is a 350 HP Stage 2 Dark type. It's got the Shadow Hiding ability and the Void Gale attack. Shadow Hiding says that when one of your Dark Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon EX, your opponent takes 1 less prize card. The effect doesn't stack, but that is an incredibly powerful effect. What this means is that essentially, whilst Mega Gengar is on your bench, all of your Dark Pokemon give up 1 less prize card when your opponent is attacking them with attacks from their Pokemon EX, and that means the single prize Pokemon like the Petronts, the Roaring Moons, all give up no prizes. But it also means cards like Zoroark, Charizard EX, Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX, they only give up 1 prize card, which is just incredible. Imagine having to get through multiple Charizard EX and you're only getting 1 prize card per Charizard you take out. That's a lot of resources you're going to have to get through. Even for the decks that do essentially unlimited damage output like the Goldengos, they're just not going to have enough resources to be able to get through multiple 330 HP 1 prize Pokemon. Now, if we're being realistic, that would require getting multiple Stage 2s into play, and I don't think that's going to be where we see Mega Gengar. Mega Gengar does work with all of these other Stage 2s, but it's going to be very clunky trying to get multiple Stage 2s into play. Charizard is a deck that's done it before, but it's not going to be going down this Mega Gengar route. And similarly, we have seen some lists in Japan where people are pairing it with the likes of Marnie's Grimmsnarl. Obviously, all of that is really cool in theory, but it's never going to come off consistently. So that might beg the question, why am I excited about this card? And ultimately, it's because of what we talked about earlier on with the new Grimsley supporter. Essentially, Grimsley works like an Archie or a Maxi in this case, and you can search out for your Mega Gengar EX, find a way of putting it onto the top, maybe with like an Academy at night or something, and then get your Mega Gengar out for free without having to play the Ghastly and Haunter and Rare Candy and all that kind of stuff. And that package, I think, could be very, very impactful in a couple of different decks. The first is that Zoroark, where you could quite easily still have the draw engine, so you're not worried about using Grimsley as your supporter for the turn. You still have plenty of draw power through trade, and because of that, you're then able to trade your way into the combo, but also trade afterwards and not worry about having to use a non-draw supporter, so you have more flexibility of when you can use the Grimsley to get the Mega Gengar out. Turning your Zoroarks into 280 HP one prize Pokemon is pretty gross, and ultimately we know how powerful Zoroark can be in a meta filled with Gardevoir, so if we continue to see a trend of Gardevoir being popular, we can definitely see Zoroark coming back into the format, and because of that, I think you could easily slot this 3 or 4 card package in. But also, we've seen this in Japan paired with Roaring Moon, both the 1 prize version and the 2 prize version, knocking them down to 0 and 1 prize versions respectively, and that's also a very, very powerful suite of cards to have in your arsenal. Having 0 prize baby Roaring Moons that can just churn out attacks every turn is pretty scary, especially when you're able to recycle them very easily, and then having 1 prize Roaring Moon EXs that can pretty much just take a knockout on whatever and only give up 1 prize in return is just incredibly powerful. It gives your deck a lot of flexibility, and you can even run like a poison package with Petulant in there as well to be able to have 0 prize Petulants that can also try and take a cheeky early prize KO on some of the evolution-based decks by dealing excessive amounts of damage with poison through Petulant's ability. So I think there's a lot of homes for this. It's not as plain and simple as just playing another stage 2, and I don't really think the attack's worth it. Void Gale deals 230, which is a nice attack, and you move an energy to one of your bench Pokemon. It's a 2 energy attack, so it's pretty efficient, but I think the standout piece of the card is that ability, and that's why I'm not really focused on building a Gengar deck per se, and instead I think it's better as a tech Pokemon. Now obviously there are some issues with this ability. Shadow Hiding only works if your opponent uses an EX Pokemon to knock out with damage from an attack, so any damage counter placement, Dusknoirs, Munkidorys, all that kind of stuff, all of that's going to get around your Shadow Hiding ability, so it's not plain sailing. There's definitely going to be situations where this ability is pretty useless, but that's why this Grimsley package I think works so well. If you see that you're up against a matchup where there's going to be lots of situations where your opponent's going to be able to potentially get around the ability, you can just ignore that. You can trade these cards away if you're playing them in the Zoroark deck, or you can just, bin them with Ultra Balls or whatever in the Roaring Moon deck. You never have to play them if you're not playing all of the stage 2 pieces around them as well. And that's why I think this could be potentially an interesting tech Pokemon going forward, because you actually will have the ability to be able to ignore it rather than having to build your whole deck around it. That being said, we do still feel it's only that 4-star because of the issues with the ability and there's certain situations where you're not going to be able to make use of it, as well as just having to play this package that sometimes you're not going to be able to make use of. Ultimately, this isn't a stage 2 that I think you're ever going to want to properly build around, and that's why it's only ever going to be at that 4-star. But that doesn't take away from how excited I am about the card. I'm really interested to see if we can put it into the Roaring Moon, into the Zoroark, and try and build something there, and try and make use of this incredibly game-breaking ability in the right situations.
We also have a Stage 1 Dark Mega. We have the Mega Sharpedo EX, a 330 hit point Dark type Stage 1 that has 2 attacks here. The first, for just 1 Darkness, does 70, and you can draw 2 cards. Pretty decent, it's a Stage 1 Pokemon, so if you've chosen to go first with this deck, you can get a turn 2 70 damage prod in that can knock out some evolving basics, and also knocking out Munkidori as well, thanks to weakness, which is actually quite relevant right now. So you do deal with a lot of single prize Pokemon with ease. And then you also have the Hungry Jaw attack for just 2 Dark Energy. You deal 120, but if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it, this does 150 more damage. 270 is a pretty decent chunk, but a little bit off where we want to be, and there is this awkward stipulation that you have to have damage on yourself. So I think it leans in towards the new Toxtricity that we have that can search the deck for basic darkness energy, attaching them to your benched dark Pokemon, and then you put 2 counters on them. So there's an obvious synergy going on here. That's what they're trying to make you build around, where the extra Stage 1 is the acceleration here, but there are a couple more sort of niche ways you can try and get Sharpedo going, because I'm a little bit concerned that Toxtricity damages your already fairly squishy 3-prize Pokemon. I don't really want to get too much onto the Sharpedo to make it worthwhile, so possibly you could try having a non-dark type Carvanha in your deck with Risky Ruins to put 2 counters on yourself as it comes into play, or you could also try having the Dark type, the new Carvanha, because it does have 70 hit points, that seems much more relevant. And you can early game Petulant EX into some Carvanhas and get them attacking and get poison ticking onto your own Pokemon. That can get you started at least in the game. And then if you use, for example, Carvanha to TM Evo into Sharpedos and Toxtricities, that can set you up for future turns as well. So that 2 energy attack cost is frustrating in that you probably need to have some acceleration. And Toxtricity probably is the thing to provide that, but I'm a little bit concerned that you require some acceleration. You also still require some extra damage modifiers on top of this. Sure, if you're using Toxtricity to pull energy from the deck, you could spend manual attachments on Monkey Dory, and obviously we're a dark deck, so we're going to have easy ways to do that, and you can Adrenabrain off Sharpedo to improve your damage output that little bit, but you might also need to have additional modifiers on top of that, whether it's like Janine plus Mochi, whether it's like Maximum Belt. I don't know, it feels like we're already jumping through hoops to get multiple stage 1s in play. Neither of them draw cards outside of Greedy Fangs just drawing 2, like on 1 turn in the game, and it feels like you also need to have extra mods on top of that, so it feels like a really clunky build. Maybe I'm underestimating the search from deck acceleration, because that is genuinely very, very strong, but I'm not sure if Sharpedo was the best recipient. Even if it does enable the new Superior that we'll talk about later on, I'm a little bit sus of this deck. I should point out that Sharpedo is also weak to Grass, which is a common weakness. It does have Free Retreat that might help with Toxtricity and whatnot, because the acceleration is only to your bench. So the two are meant to be built together, but I just don't see them coming together to be all that powerful.
Onto the Metal type Empoleon EX. It's a 320 HP Stage 2 Metal type with a Counter Dance ability and the Iron Phaser attack. And I'm super sad about this one because Empoleon is Joe's favourite Pokemon and one of my favourite Pokemon. So we were really hoping for a good Empoleon EX. Unfortunately, this is not the one. Counter Stance says prevent all of effects of attacks done to this Pokemon by the attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. Obviously that's a nice ability to have, means that no damage counters can be placed, no special conditions can be given to Empoleon, but ultimately it's not really anything special. You'd need a powerful attack to make this card good, and Iron Phaser is just not powerful enough. For 3 energy, deals 210 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 60 less damage from attacks, so this actually becomes pretty tanky. You've got 320 HP base, minus 60 from damage, kind of takes you up to 380, but then also you've got Iron Defender, the card from the Mega Evolution expansion that you can play in a metal deck, so you could potentially have a huge amount of HP that your opponent has to get through. With the Metal Defenders, you can make it so they have to deal like a minimum of 150, 180 before they're even dealing any damage to you, so there are some, good things about how tanky this card can be. You don't get any added consistency like you do from Dragapult or anything. The Piplup and Primplup, they don't draw you cards or accelerate energy or anything like that, so realistically, there's just no good reason to be playing Empoleon. I'm super sad that that's the case. Like I say, Empoleon's one of my favourite Pokemon. It is Joe's favourite Pokemon, so we were really hoping for something good, but unfortunately, not this time for Empoleon. It's just going to be a 1-star card.
Onto Mega Lopunny EX then, one of my favourite cards from the set. You can really get creative with this stage 1. It has 330 hit points and is a colourless type that has 2 attacks here. The first for just 1 colourless energy is Gale Thrust, dealing 60, plus if this Pokemon was on your bench this turn, this attack does 170 more damage. So a total of 230 is a really good number to kick off with here. Instantly, this Lopunny can become a great option to be gusting up engine Pokemon like Pheasantipity EX, Mew EX, but also it's enough to deal with more substantial Pokemon like Iron Hands EX, which also seems really appealing. And then we also have the Spike Hopper attack, which is a really handy one to have here as well. For 2 colourless, you deal 160, and this attack's damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. That's a really big deal, because if ever we're building around Lopunny EX, it means that we don't have to worry about forcing in a wall-breaking Pokemon to deal with anything like Crustle. You naturally have a decent answer within your deck, and it also makes Lopunny even more of like a splashable tech line, actually, because you can justify it as a wall breaker in addition to an easy 1 attachment attacking option, similar to how we've had like Blood Moon in a number of decks. Obviously Lopunny is more spaces and more commitment and whatnot, but because it's multifaceted in that way and could be more of an early game gusting approach, that really could justify it in all sorts of decks. Now, sticking with the core concept of like if we want to build a Lopunny deck in general, first of all, there's Fan Rotom that can get both Baneri, but then also some extra colourless synergistic Pokemon. For example, the Dunsparce could be really handy here within your deck because they can naturally be promoted at the start of your turn, knowing that you can evolve and run away, so that you can then bring in your Mega Lopunny quite happily. Also, there's a new Linoone in the set that has the Excite Dash ability that's pretty much meant for the Mega Lopunny EX. I don't actually think the Linoone's that great. I think Jet Energy is just such a phenomenal special energy that we would lean in towards that instead. But I do think the fact that Fan Rotom can get multiple Baneri, also do the whole thing with Ditto as well, that could be pretty handy within the deck. Immediately that makes me quite happy, and Fan Rotom, as we know, can be a really useful Pokemon to just kicking off the prize race, if you'll pardon the pun. And because Lopunny is like so low maintenance, we have the space to really ramp up this baseline to 30 here. A lot of builds in Japan are going down a couple directions of like straight Lopunny builds. The first of which is a poison package, where we can use Brute Bonnet and Petulant to be early game prize taking options whilst not triggering Fezandipity. And then the Mochi Gale Thrust means that we effectively hit 280 for one attachment by poisoning the opponent's active and ourselves, and then Mochi is kicking in to get us up to that really nice damage output threshold. So we only really sit out of range of those big stage 2s, and in a lot of those cases we could try and weave in things like Turo Scenario, because we're such an efficient one energy attacker that these two-shotting stage 2s can be two-shot back quite happily, knowing that we can pick these Pokemon off our board. Another cool way that I've seen Lopunny work is with the Ghosts, actually, having some Dusclops and Dusknoir. Again, one Dusclops gets us to 280, and of course the Curse Blast sets us up nicely for a Gale Thrust KO, even into Mega EX Pokemon for the most part. It also gives us that option to be far more cheeky by taking out multiple EXs and engine Pokemon in the same turn, giving you a lot more flexibility. Essentially, the whole idea around the Curse Blast package is that Lopunny is so self-sufficient and so low to the ground and so efficient in terms of deck space that you simply have the room to make Dusknoir work. Why wouldn't you go for this combination? Because it's one of the most powerful things we have in the game, and you can easily manipulate your prizes so that it doesn't affect how many Lopunny your opponent has to knock out in order to close out the game in terms of a prize race. It's not just like pure Lopunny decks where this is popping up, however. It's also been a decent option within Golden Go builds, again, giving them easy boss KO plays that allow you to sort of preserve your energy attachments. It gives Golden Go a wall breaker, which it desperately needs, and it can also be handy into the likes of Jellicent, for example. Also, Charizard EX builds have looked towards this card in a 1-1 package. Again, I think in part because there are some Noctowl Charizards roaming around that have Fan Rotom anyway, so you can easily find the Baneri early and give yourself, again, a wall breaker with that Spike Hopper. So many times we're seeing this shoved in just because it can wall break, but then can also be an easily, like, oh, it's between turns, I promote Pidgeot, suddenly I have at any point I want it, an easy one attachment, boss, Lopunny, take 2 prize cards approach with this really high hit points as well. So I think this card is just absolutely phenomenal. It's already looking like it could make its way into a couple of high tier decks, and I also think it's going to be the backbone of a new archetype in its own right because it's so efficient, so easy to get going, and there are so many synergies that are just glaringly strong here. So I'm a massive fan. One of my favorite cards of the set, no doubt. I can't wait to start testing it out.
On to some one prize Pokemon then, and the first is Ludicolo. It's a grass type 160 HP Pokemon with the excited healing ability. It says once during a turn, if you have a grass Mega Pokemon EX in play, you may heal 60 damage from one of your Pokemon. Now obviously this is meant to be paired with Mega Heracross EX. Your opponent deals a load of damage to you. You then use excited healing to heal that damage off whilst doing a lot more damage with Mega Heracross's attack. And we do have cards like Forest of Vitality in the format and the other Ludicolo with the Vibrant Dance ability, giving all of your Pokemon plus 40 HP in play. So there are plenty of cards to support Ludicolo, but ultimately a 60 heal isn't really what the Mega Heracross deck is looking for. And similarly, the Mega Venusaur decks that we're seeing play aren't really playing too much healing, but if they are, they have Shuckle, which I think is just better than Ludicolo, because 2 Shuckles is the same as 1 Ludicolo, but you don't need to get a stage 2 out. Even if you do have Forest of Vitality in play, it's still a bit complicated. So overall, despite having a couple of good Ludicolos right now, I don't think this is going to be good enough.
We gain a really interesting basic fire type with Moltres here, a 120 hit points Pokemon that has the Fighting Wings attack for just 1 fire, dealing 20, but if your opponent's active is a Pokemon EX, it deals 90 more damage. This feels quite similar to how we've seen Chi-Yu popping up in Charizard EX decks, but once again, there are so many builds in the format that just happen to play Fire Energy. For example, Dragapult, which doesn't even have Acceleration, can now consider this card to instantly give you good counter-catcher options onto the likes of Teal Mask Ogerpon EX, which we know are in a couple of prominent archetypes in the format. But equally, if you want to lean even further into this Moltres, Defiance Band pushes the Fighting Wings up to 140 damage, meaning that now you can KO Golden Go EX. So this can be, again, in that similar vein to Chi-Yu, a more efficient energy attacking option that can easily help completely swing more than one matchup, really. It can help out against Raging Bolt, it can help out against Terror Box, it can help out against that Golden Go as well if you're choosing to play Defiance Band or have other damage modifiers at your disposal. So I think this is going to be a really good like anti-aggro option in some already known Stage 2 decks in the game, and could justify itself in all sorts of other decks as well. Of course, it's not just going to be good for being a type coverage Pokemon, because 110 damage already can set up Burning Darkness, it can already set up Phantom Dive as well, similar to how we've seen Curse Blast do a similar thing. So Moltres can just sort of be shoved early on while you're waiting around to get your Phantom Dives or Burning Darkness going, and put some pressure into some EX Pokemon as well. So really impressive as a type coverage option for the aggro decks, but also can be good for setting up other Pokemon as well when you're lacking your key Stage 2 attacker.
Next up, we have a 1 prize Ceruledge. It's got the Purgatory Slash ability. For 1 energy, deals 220 damage, but you have to discard 4 basic fire energy from your hand in order to do this attack. Now, we do have Firebreather, we do have Superior Energy Retrieval, we have ways of getting lots of energy into the hand quite quickly, and maybe this could be a 1 prize option in a Ceruledge deck, but I think overall, because we already have Lunarock in Ceruledge right now as some 1 prize attackers, it's going to be quite difficult to weave in playing this 1 prize Ceruledge, because most of the time the Ceruledge deck doesn't actually play a huge amount of fires, it plays more fighting energy than anything. Now, this has seen a little bit of play as a 1 prize attacking option in Goldengo as a, I guess, kind of a mirror counter, so be able to deal with other Goldengos as well as get through things like Crystals, and actually can one-shot some EX Pokemon, some bench-sitting 2 prize Pokemon, your Phesandipities, all of that kind of thing. But ultimately, I don't think this is better than Lunarock in those decks. I don't think this is a particularly good 1 prize attacker in the Ceruledge deck, and therefore I don't actually think it's going to see play in any of the Goldengos and Ceruledge in the long term. It's a nice 1 prize option to have, but I think it's just a bit too anti-synergistic with the Ceruledge we already have, and it's too many cards to be able to build into a Goldengo deck.
We do have a Stage 1 Brambleghast, 100 hit point Psychic type with the Panic Prison ability here. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, you leave your opponent's active Pokemon confused. It's really not blowing me away, even with the strange timepiece item where we could be picking up the Brambleghast and having multiple uses of this ability over the game. I don't feel like Confusion is nearly enough of a frustrating status condition to inflict. There's a lot of decks already playing lots of pivoting cards to get around corner approaches, so it would have to be a really specific like controlled deck that recovered item cards, like a Magneton Junk Magnet control deck. I don't know. This already sounds terrible. Yeah, Brambleghast is not looking too appealing.
Next up, we have Paldean Tauros, 130 HP fighting type, with a Raging Charge attack for 1 fighting energy that says this attack does 40 damage for each of your Pokemon with Tauros in their name and play that has any damage counters on them. Now, we have Paldean Tauros and we have regular Tauros, so you can get up to 8 Tauros on your board damaged, which would take this up to 320 for just 1 energy, which on a 1 prize Pokemon is pretty impressive. Now, you'd need a Terra Pokemon and an Area 0 to be able to do that, but it is possible at least. However, I think more realistically, you're not going to be playing this with Area 0. You're going to be playing this with Risky Ruins, and you're just going to try and fill your board with Tauros and then do Raging Charge for 200 to 240 damage as a potential 1 prize attacking option. Now, unfortunately, I still think it's going to be a bit too inconsistent. You're not going to be able to have a draw engine on board. You're going to have to rely on your top decks and your supporters. And whilst this is only a 1 energy attacking Pokemon, I don't think you're going to be able to recycle Raging Charge effectively enough to be able to make this a decent 1 prize archetype. Even if you were to put in something like a Lunarock engine to be your draw engine for the deck, you then limit yourself to only having 4 spaces for Tauros on your board, which is just capping at 160, which just isn't going to be good enough as a 1 prize archetype. There's going to be plenty of decks that are going to eventually be able to take multiple prizes against you, taking out multiple Tauros at once, making it really difficult for you to then be able to try and get back into the game particularly quickly. Our 1 prize Pokemon need to be doing more damage than that, so unfortunately this is not going to be a powerful enough 1 prize archetype, and it just sits at that 1 star because of that.
We do have a Stage 2 fighting type Flygon with 150 hit points, and it's kind of going back to its mill roots here with its Flapping Sand ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, or when this Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an attack of your opponent's Pokemon, you may discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. So it's not just coming into play, it's also when your opponent's dealing with these Pokemon, which is kind of interesting. It's only a 2-card discard, though, if you're sort of building them in the back and trying to, like, Turo up your Flygons and constantly evolve, using possibly the new Dawn Supporter card to get your full evolution line and start, like, spamming them down as you go. So I feel like it's still, like, fairly slow in the milling approach, especially when you compare it to the likes of Great Tusk, which is a basic that can do it from turn 1, and Wugtrio that can sometimes just go haywire on coin flips. Now, Possibly Flygon can make it into those archetypes just to give you a surplus of discard that your opponent has to play around, and they probably can't target down the Flygon itself either because they're just giving up more cards. So there could be a bit of extra help within the already mill strategies in the game, but also you could try and look to have like maybe an Impound Sudowoodo control deck where you just use Erica's Invitation and accompanying flutes and just find anything that you can try and trap throughout the game. And because this ability isn't an attack, of course, it means that you can keep announcing Impound on whatever you can possibly trap with counter catchers, and then you try and do the Flygon spam where you're picking them up, putting them back down and whatnot. I again think it's not that many discards that it's ever going to be too scary, especially compared to the other mill decks that we already have in the game. Great Tusk just being like far more consistent and low to the ground, and the Wug Trio again just having more raw discard on average. So I feel like this isn't going to see too much play, but there's always going to be that critical mass of mill where it starts becoming an actual problem. And if this can weave its way into the already known mill decks, possibly it could push them a little bit further in their play rates.
Onto Seviper then. This is a 120 HP Dark type Pokemon with the Excite Power ability. It says if you have a Dark Mega Pokemon EX in play, this Pokemon's attacks do 120 more damage to your opponent's Pokemon. Now, our 120 damage buff is pretty relevant. This turns into 240 damage with its Jet Black Fang attack, which isn't anything to sniff out on a one-prize Pokemon. It does take 3 energy to use, but we do have a new Toxtricity I'll talk about in a moment that can help you accelerate energy onto your board, which is pretty good. And also, when you're playing this alongside Gengar, if you do decide to go down the route of trying to build a Gengar-only deck, this is actually a 0 prize Pokemon, which is pretty good. Now, obviously, this is better with Mega Absol rather than having to get a Stage 2 Pokemon out, but with Mega Gengar, you can kind of see how this whole deck is meant to work. You're meant to accelerate to your Pokemon with the Toxtricity and then use them as 0 prize attacking options while the Mega Gengar is on your board. I think there's some decent Dark support in this set that may mean there's like a Dark box that we could potentially try and play with Toxtricity, and then like Monkey Dories to heal the damage from Toxtricity and stuff like that. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment, but I think this would be a feature in that deck, so it might be like a low tier archetype to try out. Obviously Dark is still a great type to be right now with Gardevoir's success, so it could be worth trying out that archetype, and I think Seviper would make it, whether it's with Mega Gengar or Mega Absol. It kind of waits to be seen, but either way, that I think is what you would try and build around and where you would probably see Seviper. I don't think that archetype's going to be particularly good, but it may be worth experimenting with, and that's why it sits at that 2-star rating for us.
Sableye is a really interesting basic Dark type with 80 hit points. It has the Angry Claw attack here. For just 1 Darkness, it does 20, and if you have a Stage 2 Dark Pokemon in play, this does 70 more damage. I think what they're trying to do is push the Grimsley's move supporter, so that if you are playing, for example, a Mega Gengar EX deck, the Sableye can be a really cheap, efficient 1 energy poke, and if your opponent knocks it out back, they don't take any prize cards for it. That's the idea, that's the concept. However, the decks that I'm trying to construct with Gengar don't really need this card. I want to commit my attachments to the Gengars themselves if I'm going down that direction, or if I'm just having it as a like 1 Gengar, 1 Grimsley plus Academy like mini package within these other Dark decks. I feel like I'm not going to commit the space to the Sableye because it's not impactful enough. I feel like things like Clutch Yveltal are going to be superior single prize Pokemon that I look towards instead in that case.
Here's the Toxtricity then that I mentioned, its bad upper ability. It says once during your turn, you may search your deck for a basic Dark Energy, attach it to one of your bench Dark Pokemon, and then if you do, you put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. Energy acceleration from the deck is, to be honest, usually the best type of acceleration. It thins out the deck. You don't have to find it already. You don't have to play a huge amount to be able to find it and get it into your hand or get it into the discard pile early. So energy search and energy acceleration from the deck is the best type of energy acceleration out there. And we know the 2 damage counter thing isn't really an issue. It's the exact same as Gardevoir, right? You can just put some Monkey Dories in your deck, and because you're going to be accelerating energy anyway, you're playing Dark Energy anyway, you're going to have spare energy attachments to be able to put onto your board, so you can monkey the damage off pretty easily. So like I said, we could maybe build like a Toxtricity Dark box deck that you could potentially run things like Seviper, Mega Absol, Sableye, all of these things in. I think it's going to be pretty low tier. I don't think there's a huge amount of reasons to play this over some of the other archetypes that are already in the format. I don't think it's doing anything particularly special, but it could be a fun one to try out. Dark box archetype often gets a lot of hype behind it, so it could be a nice one to try, and we know how impactful Mega Absol has already been in the Mega Revolution format. It's seen some play alongside Mega Kangaskhan, and it's been the talk of a lot of different archetypes, some potentially good ways of being able to use it to counter some specific archetypes. So, Mega Absol is pretty good, and this could be a way of being able to accelerate to it to be able to power it up in one turn. So, yeah, I don't think this is going to be crazy good, just at that 2-star rating for us as a potential rogue archetype to try, but one to give it a go. Energy acceleration like this is never really one that you can ignore.
For metal types, we have the stage 1 Bronzong. It does have 140 hit points, and it has 2 attacks. The first is triple draw, just for 1 colour, so allowing you to draw 3 cards. That's fine in a pinch, I suppose. But we also have the tool drop attack here, the main focal point, for 3 colours energy, dealing 40 times each tool attached to all Pokemon in play. That's yours and your opponent, so whenever your opponent does put a tool in play, you may think about gusting around that Pokemon to keep the damage for yourself, or simply punish them for a heavy use of tools in their own deck. But I think it's pretty clear that we're going to be trying to load up as many tools as possible onto our own Pokemon. Now, we have seen the Rotom EX means that possibly you could have some basic Rotoms, but I'm actually more interested in the Revavroom EX, with the idea that Genesect EX could be a great way to find multiple Bronzong throughout the game, as well as the Revavroom EX itself. Thanks to its tune-up ability, you can have up to 4 tools attached to it. So ideally, we're going to be chucking a bunch of tanking tools onto it, like Rigid Bands, for example. So the Revavroom is hopefully untouchable for certain decks and forcing the opponent for a number of the Bronzong instead. If you are going to have the Revavroom EX, maybe you could play an even thicker line and also have the Rumbling Engine Revavroom as well. Suddenly you have an easy way to get multiple stage 1s online, but also have a way to draw cards throughout the game as well, because you're going to need to upkeep your energy cards, because the high attack cost of Bronzong probably requires a combination of reversals and ignition energy, and you need to have a bunch of tool cards and whatnot. Again, I should point that we have the treasure tracker in format, so possibly you could have like an Arvent engine to help you get Genesect early on, but then throughout the game you could also like treasure track your way towards an instant Revavroom, getting 4 tools attached to it, like all of your Rigid Bands, and then like a Brave Bangle going on to Bronzong. Suddenly you're doing a pretty decent chunk and your main engine is already built. I feel like there's some cool synergy here, definitely like a nice gimmick, and you can see how smoothly it can come together, but you're still playing a whole heap of cards that are going to make the deck very clunky at times. It's still reliant on special energy at the end of the day, so there are still some big headaches for this deck, but it is cool to see Tool Drop come back in a very refreshing and different way to how we've seen it in the past.
Next up then, we have Wigglytuff. This is just a small nod to it having the round attack. Obviously, we already have the whole Seismitoad line from the Black Bolt and White Flare sets that came out a couple of months ago. Now we also have Wigglytuff as well. This is really just a nod back to the old round deck where it had Seismitoad and Wigglytuff before. It was much better back then. I don't think it's going to be particularly good now, but definitely worth noting at least this nod back to the old round archetype that now does a decent amount of damage. You have extra ways of being able to use round and get more round Pokemon onto your board. So yeah, just a fun one, not going to be particularly competitive, but wanted to take a note at the throwback to the old round deck here.
Ambipom is a pretty interesting stage 1 colorless Pokemon. Unfortunately, it has 110 hit points. I would like it way more if it was just 100, so we could find it from Fancall. But at the very least, you still can find Apom this way. And it does have the slap attack for 2 colors, you can do 50, but I really care more about the dual tail attack here. For 3 colorless, you discard 2 from this Pokemon, and it does 60 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. The only real reason I'm mentioning this is because of that Fan Rotom synergy. There could be a world where you go down an Ambipom approach rather than a Wellspring Mask Ogerpon approach in a Noctowl deck. Now, I'm pretty sure this won't be better than Torrential Pump, but the idea is that you're not forcing out your Crystal early, and you're only representing a single prize attacking Pokemon. I know that you're doing less damage than Torrential Pump, and 60 isn't the key number, but from 1 Jewel Seeker on turn 2, you could go Hilda Ultra Ball, Hilda getting you Ambipom plus Ignition, and then Ultra Ball getting you Horlucha, and suddenly Dual Tail can do a 70-70, to 2 benched Pokemon. Of course, the flying entry can't go onto the active, so it's a little bit more specific than Torrential Pump, but it can allow you to get a double 70 attack, and it's also cool that Torrential Pump is forced into the active spot, so if your opponent's proactively retreating into something to be that sponge, Ambipom can also get around it. So definitely quite different to the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon, a little bit more work, a little bit more setup, and a little bit more specific, with probably some more one-offs that you can prize and whatnot. And one of the upsides of Wellspring is that it's a Terra, so getting it down enables Jewel Seeker, whereas Ambipom and Apom do not. So there's definitely some awkwardness here, but I did just want to point out the fact that it's another early game sniping option that we have in the game. maybe I'm tunneling too much on Noctowl here, and maybe just saying that Fan Rotom and having Hilda within a different Ignition Energy style deck could be good enough. But I'm just thinking that cherry picking exactly Ultra Ball Hawlucha is what makes it like really good. So yeah, I think it's worth nodding to. We have seen these sorts of dual splash attacks in the past being quite good from the likes of Dugong and whatnot, going back a few years now. And I think 60 was a much better number than it is to this day. But I did just want to not be completely blind about Ambipom, because this is an ability that can still be scary in the right circumstances, especially if you're a colorless deck opting to go first, giving yourself that really good odds of taking out multiple basics. I still think it is worthwhile thinking about, although I still can't really give it that high of a rating. I don't think Terrabox is going to be adapting this much.
And finally then we have Linoone with its Excite Dash ability. It says if this Pokemon is on your bench and you have a Mega Pokemon in play, you may use the ability, switch this Pokemon with your active Pokemon. Now, stick an Air Balloon on this, and in any Mega deck, you're able to just have a permanent free retreat pivoting option. You're not going to get trapped by anything. You're not going to get, corner trapped or anything like that. So it's a decent ability to have, especially if you're able to then just pivot out of it with an Air Balloon or anything like that. And obviously, ultimately, this is meant to be paired with that Mega Lopunny that Joe talked about earlier on, being able to dash in and out and boost Mega Lopunny's damage. But we do have Jet Energy, which basically does the same thing for very similar effect, but also you're getting an energy attachment alongside it, and you don't have to worry about getting a stage 1 into play as well. And also, Lopunny isn't really going to be a deck itself, I don't think. Like we've said, it seems like it's going to be potentially just an additional attacker in archetypes as maybe a 1-1 line or a 2-1 line, and you're not going to then also want to put another 1-1 Linoone into your deck as well. So ultimately, it's a pretty cool card. It's nice to have this kind of switching effect, and I think it's one that's worth keeping in mind, especially if we see more and more of these retreat trapping options. And the more Megas we get, obviously there's going to be more Megas in the format, so it's one to keep in mind, but I don't think even with Lopunny, this is going to be good enough right now.